How are the Gophers going to keep all these wide receivers' mouths fed? And it might be wise to take one element from the USC Trojans game.
Hey,
You are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week. So be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube. Let me know what you're thinking of the channel. Let me know what you thought of Top 10 Tuesdays on yesterday's show. And if you haven't caught it yet, we talked about the top 10 quarterbacks in the Big Ten, and Autman was in that list, but where did he finish off? You're going to have to check out yesterday's show. Now, also be sure to subscribe wherever you get podcasts, Apple Pods, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it. Find us there at Locked On Golden Gophers, and be sure to leave a 5-star review. Now, if you're listening to the show, you're listening to a show about college football in May, which means you are an absolute diehard Gophers fans, and good on you. I'm right there with you, and we're going to keep this going through the offseason, so definitely be sure to tap in wherever you get podcasts, or if you like us over on YouTube, I appreciate that as well. Now, today we're talking about the Minnesota wide receiver room because there's a whole lot of depth in there. There's a whole lot of talent, and in today's world, these student athletes are ready to transfer at the drop of a dime. So how can Minnesota incorporate this depth and this talent without losing guys to the portal, without losing key talent to the portal? I think there are some very unique things that the Gophers can do, and one element that they should maybe take from USC and bring it over to Minnesota. But before we jump into that, today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/lockedon, and when you enter promo code LockedOnCollege, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. Now, let's talk about this. How can Minnesota make the most of a deep wide receiver room without the risk of losing major transfers? That is the key question here, because we've seen the talent firsthand this spring. We've seen the talent over the course of last season from Jackson and Crab and Brockington at times and Spanford. Look, I think the right answer is incorporating an element from Lincoln Riley in the USC offense. Now, no, by no means am I saying pass the ball like crazy or as often as what we saw from USC. That's just not our style. We know that's not Coach Fleck, and that's not going to fly. I'm not saying change the whole offense. That would be silly. But the usage at USC was my interesting finding over there, because when you look at USC and their pass catchers breakdowns in 2022, they had 4 wide receivers with 60-plus targets, 5 wide receivers or 5 players with 30 or more targets, 2 running backs with 130 carries or more, and 2 additional players with 50 or more carries. So they got the running game going. They had 2 players with over 130 carries and another 2 that had at least 50 attempts. That's a healthy amount. You like to see that. The Gophers like to run the ball and will still run the ball even when they pass more. But those target numbers, 4 pass catching options with 60-plus targets and 5 with 30 or more. Now, if you compare that to Minnesota in 2022, Minnesota had 1 player with 60 or more targets. That player was Brevin Spanford, and he had exactly 60 targets. Now, they had 3 players with 30 or more targets, and that was Jackson with 58, Wright with 35, and Michael Brown-Stevens with 39. But you can already see how USC had really spread the ball out. Now, even going further from that, we had 1 running back with 130 or more carries. That was Mo Ibrahim. He had 320 carries, so a lot more than 130. But we had 2 other players with more than 50 attempts on the ground, Trey Potts with 102 and Bryce Williams with 51. So those 2 offenses were drastically different last year. And again, I am not saying that they will be similar next year. I'm not even saying we'll play a similar style, but what I do believe Minnesota could use is a similar approach with a wide receiver rotation. And that is the key here. USC had a rotation of 8 wide receivers, and they got heavy usage from them. 4 of those wide receivers all played over 300 snaps. That was Addison, that was Taj Washington, that was Mario Williams, and that was Brendan Rice. 4 receivers with over 300 snaps. Then they had 4 other receivers with over 100 snaps, and one of those 4 was above 200 snaps as well. So you're talking about 5 receivers with over 200 snaps, and then 3 others with still over 100 snaps. Plus they had 2 tight ends with 130 snaps or more, and 2 running backs with 260 snaps lined up on pass plays. You look at that, you see that they used a wide variety, but that rotation of the receivers is what is key in my opinion. Now, maybe we're not using a full 8 like USC uses, but I think you have the talent to get a rotation of 6, maybe 7 if you're counting Brevin Spanford as more of the receiving type option, but he'll be on the field in different capacities, whether it be inline, whether it be in the slot, whether it be on the outside, he'll get his. But what I'm saying is that rotation, maybe of 6 wide receivers, that rotation is everything. Now, in Minnesota in 2022, Brevin Spanford saw over 300 snaps. He was the only player to see over 300 snaps when it came to passing plays. 2 wide receivers above 250 were Michael Brown-Stevens and Daniel Jackson, and then 2 others above 100 in Lemeki Brockington and Dalen Wright. 1 running back saw over 170 snaps in passing plays. So again, quite the difference, but that rotation is super interesting. And I think Minnesota could take that and run with it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that. Even looking at the spring game, it looks like we might have some findings of how that rotation and that lineup could look. And we're going to talk about that coming up here in a minute, but the distribution could be a similar model in Minnesota. Now, you could possibly incorporate it in a different style, of course, because Minnesota likes to run more tight ends in there for the running game. You're going to get Caller up in there. You're going to have Brevin Sport. I'm messing up my boy's name again. When I talk too fast, that's where I start to trip on Brevin's name. But Brevin Spanford is going to be on the field and getting opportunities. But what I'm saying is that I like that rotation element, and I think it could be beneficial for the Gophers, and maybe we'll see some more of that next year. Now, I think if the Gophers took it and ran with it, maybe you have 4 pass catchers that have a heavy load. You're talking around that 300 snaps mark, and you see maybe more of a Brevin Spanford, Crab, Daniel Jackson, and then another one of the guys, maybe one of the transfers, maybe Brockington, who knows. Then you have 2 to 3 others with good usage and rotating in often, whether that be Brockington, Crooms, Spencer, Hoskins. You've got Caller mixing in on some run stuff, but also he'll see some passing targets like he did last year. And then you get RB usage from guys like Zach Evans, from Sean Tyler, maybe Darius Taylor, who all have shown the element and the capability to catch the ball as well. But who will be the main pass catchers in 2023? I think that's a loaded question, but we're going to give it an educated guess, and I really do think we can hone in. And plus, there's one element that I caught in a rewatch of the spring game today that I'm going to bring up coming up next. First, let's talk about our friends over at Birddogs. Now, like I said, Birddogs is a new friend of the show, and I'm going to be straight up with you. They are extremely comfortable, they fit well, and they're versatile. I've worn them on the golf course, and I'm going to wear them on the golf course again this weekend. I have worn them to work. I've now worn them to an athletic event. They're comfortable. You can wear them anywhere, and they have that khaki style, so they look professional. They look nice. You don't look like a slob anywhere you're going. And you know what? I am not going to lie to you. I've been telling everybody about them. I've told my father about them. I've told my coworkers, my boss about them, because they're actually extremely comfortable. And you know what? Pardon my take, host PFT famously never wears pants, and the only shorts he ever truly loves to wear is Birddogs. Now, if you want to find out why, you're going to want to head on over to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. And when you enter promo code LockedOnCollege, they're going to throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. So head on over today, get you 1, 2, maybe even 3 pairs. I got to get some pants as well, because right now I've got 2 pairs of shorts, but the pants look just as great, and you got to get them with a liner. Trust me on this one. You don't have to wear any undergarments with them, boxers, briefs, whatever kind of person you are, that's totally fine, but you don't need them when you put the liner in. Then the liner is what takes that comfort to the next level. Head on over to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege to get started today. Now, Gophers fans, thank you so much for listening to Locked On Golden Gophers and making us your first listen when it comes to Gophers daily sports. And a shout out to all the everydayers. I saw your questions. I saw your top 10 topics you want to hear about. I've been jotting them down in my notes. We're going to get them covered over this offseason in the top 10 shows that we do on Top 10 Tuesdays. But today we're talking about wide receivers, and we are talking about how it could look next season, who could be the key guys for this receiving room. Now, first off, this is really hard to say officially because we don't truly know for certain what the usage in the offense will be. We know that this team will look to pass the ball more, throw the ball more often next season, but we don't know what that fully entails. But what we do know is that the quarterback is uber talented. We know that the backup is accurate and trustworthy, and the wide receiver room is possibly the deepest the Gophers have ever had. Then you have a tight end who is a preseason All-American as well. So you got a whole lot of talent in there to catch the rock. So let's start there. Let's start with Brevin Spanford. He is absolutely going to be used and featured often. He saw the most targets on this team last year. I believe he saw the most targets that we've seen from a tight end in the 2000s era. Maybe Max Williams was close, but I think he saw more than Max Williams as well. So he's going to be involved. And you know what? Overall, he had the second most yardage on the team, so he didn't come back this extra year not to be featured. So you can absolutely lock him in there for getting a heavy amount of usage. Another player I think fits that similar trend is Chris Autman-Bell. He will be heavily incorporated as well. Again, he didn't use the med red. He didn't come for a 7th year. And that's still crazy to say out loud, but that is what COVID college sports is right now, to not be involved. He didn't do all that to not be involved. So he has the talent to be an alpha wide receiver. We've seen it in doses and glimpses. We saw it to kick off last year where he almost had 300 yards in about 2 games in 1 quarter before the injury. So he's going to be in there, and he has shown that he was ready to tear it up on the field. I think he's going to be heavily incorporated. And then Daniel Jackson, I think, is another lock to get heavy incorporation. He's grown so much in the last year, led the team in yardage last year, absolutely showed up big down the stretch last year, and especially in confidence. And watching him in the spring, you couldn't tell me there was a more impactful player on the offense when watching the spring practices than Daniel Jackson. He was balling out in every practice that I was able to attend this spring. Now, outside of those 3 players, I think anything is up for grabs. Now, you're going to think that from what we've seen in the spring, from what we saw in the spring game, and from what the Gophers went out and did in the portal, you would think both the portal guys are going to get good looks and heavy opportunity as well. I think Crooms will see a lot of usage from the slot. I think Elijah Spencer could be a major player for the Gophers on the outside. But that being said, you could also see some snaps where maybe Elijah Spencer's on the outside and Crab kicks into the slot, or Daniel Jackson kicks into the slot, or who knows. They have the versatility, and that will be a benefit and advantage for the Gophers, is having that versatility, not only in the case of injuries, but also in the case of keeping your opponents on their toes when they're trying to break down their film and you add in new elements of the offense that they haven't seen yet. So that can be huge. But I think that being said, outside of that, Brevin has been lined up in the slot. Brevin has been lined up on the outside. Brockington will work out in the outside probably mainly, but he could see some slot usage as well. And then you've got Christian Hoskins, who absolutely will be used in some capacities this next season. I think a lot of his work would come from the slot, but he is a player that could likely find some usage in this 23 season. Now, that's a rotation of potentially 7 pass catching weapons worked in this 2023 season. Now, in this grouping, I think you'll probably see the most amounts from maybe 6 of those guys and probably the least amount of snaps in 2023 for Hoskins, because I think Hoskins is still developing. He's still kind of raw, but that speed element is something you absolutely want to take advantage of. So I think when it comes to Hoskins, he might not have the same amount of snaps as these other guys, but I think he will get snaps. And I think when he does get snaps, his usage will be very high and often in packages that incorporate his speed elements, which he's got outside of every wide receiver and other weapon in this room. I think maybe the only player that could step up to that type of speed with him, maybe, I can't say for certain, maybe we'll have to hold a race for these two guys, but Sean Tyler has got that second gear as well. Now, because of all that, I think what you're looking at next season is a mixture of what I'm about to state here. Now, I went back and I watched the spring game, and although he didn't play a ton of snaps in the spring game, I noticed that Daniel Jackson played all of his snaps from the slot. Now, this could have been because Christian Hoskins and Corey Crooms were on the other team and the teams were mixed up and whatnot, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think we saw him used in the slot a lot in his first year of playing than last year with the Crab injury. He was put on the outside more. I think he will be a weapon that can be used in both places, but I think when you think about him playing in the slot, when you think about Daniel Jackson being a key player in the slot, it starts to all click and make sense. Because then you will start to see more pairings and more rotations that will work between those 6 pass catchers. Now, like we said, Brevin is the tight end. He'll be lining up all over. He'll get some inside and some in the slot and some on the outside, but you'll see some inline stuff with him. But I think on the outside receiver positions, you'll see a lot more of Crab, Brockington, and Spencer. I think you'll see a rotation of those guys, and it can work differently for different games. But I think those will be your 3 main guys on the outside. And then when you flip to the slot position, I think you see Daniel Jackson in there probably first, and then Corey Crooms working in there as well. I think you got those 2 as your main slot receivers. And then you've got Crab, Brockington, and Spencer as your main outside guys. Now, Jackson can give you that versatility. He can work outside as well. And if he is firing on all cylinders and it has the hot hand, maybe he starts to bounce all over the field and it gives you more advantages for your opponent in catching the defense off guard. But I think that's where you can start to see it. The 3 main outside features, the 2 slot guys, and then Christian Hoskins can work in. I think a lot of his reps have been more in the slot. So then you kind of got 3 of each, 3 on the outside, 3 in the slot, and you still got the versatility of Daniel Jackson, who can kind of go either which way. Now, all of that put together, there are still other factors that could play into it on who gets what reps for what game. The first one is depending on the matchup and the game plan. Some teams, you might be able to take advantage better when you're having multiple options. Maybe you have a slot on each side. You've got Jackson and Crooms coming from the slots. Maybe you are trying to attack with more speed elements. So Christian Hoskins gets more reps in certain games because they don't have a corner who can keep up with him. Maybe there's sometimes where you want to play Brevin out wide more often because they don't have someone to match up. I think depending on the game plan, depending on the matchup and the style of defenses that we play, because we're going to see some 4-3s, we're going to see some 3-4s, and we're going to see some 3-3-5s this year as well with the new D coordinators at Nebraska and Wisconsin. So there's going to be some ways to play with this thing and make it interesting. Now, another factor that can play into this is who has the hot hand. We saw games multiple times last year where Daniel Jackson absolutely balled out. Purdue, he put the team on his back and was the only reason the team was really in the game with all of his yardage. He also scored 2 touchdowns in the Wisconsin game and the Michigan State game. He balled out in the bowl game. There's moments where he just gets hot and he looks untouchable and he catches everything. Crab has had moments like that. Brevin has moments where he just goes up there and he absolutely hulks over folks. And then we saw in the spring game where Elijah Spencer was balling out and had 11, 12 receptions in the spring game. So if one of these guys or 2 of these guys gets hot and Ethan has that connection rolling with them, then they might be on the field more and seeing more looks their way, opportunities their way. So you're riding the hot hand in some of these occasions. You're changing it based on the matchup and the game plan. Injuries could always play a factor, and having that depth will be helpful. And then you've also got the ability to use versatility as an advantage. Like I said, you can put Daniel Jackson in the slot and you can move him outside. We've seen Crab play in the slot and outside. Brockington has the ability to play from the slot. We'll probably see a lot more outside. Christian Hoskins can be moved all over the field. I think overall that versatility, when teams start to game plan, they start to break down the film and whatnot, they might start to be like, okay, 9 is always in the slot. 9, you are focusing on 9 because of that. Then you come out in that next game and you play them and they're thinking Daniel Jackson, 9 is going to be in the slot at all times. And all of a sudden he's busting out on the outside and you've got Crab working from the slot that game. Who knows? That versatility and the ability and creativity could really give the Gophers an advantage and give opposing defenses some struggles. So I think all of that plays a factor, but I think that's your core for next year. I think those are the pass catching cores, but past 2023, beyond next year, who are some names to remember in the wide receiver room and who's got next, who is the next man up, or maybe even in the case of injury. That's how we're going to close this show out today. Gophers fans, who's got next? We've got the youth. We've been talking wide receivers at a whole deep capacity. I hope you're enjoying it. Let me know if you like these in-depth talks below. Let me know if there's other positions that you're kind of considered or concerned about or don't really know how it's going to work out. I would love to jump in further detail with those. But let's talk about the depth and who's got next when it comes to beyond 2023, because after this season, Crab will be gone, Crooms will be gone, and Brevin Spanford will be gone. All of them out of eligibility, likely trying to take a shot at the NFL or other pro options. So of the 7 key players that we kind of mentioned, or really the rotation of 6, 3 of those are gone. Now, pending production and maybe having an absolute baller year, who knows if Daniel Jackson or Elijah Spencer or someone has an opportunity to take a shot at the pros if they turn some heads. But my guess is that Spencer, Jackson, and Brockington are all back for 2024 and could be the staples for you in that year. And then it's looking at that youth and who can be the next man up to work in with them and keep that strong rotation going. And I think the first guy you look to on the outside is Kenrick Lanier. He absolutely showed up in the early spring. He made some outstanding plays. You could see the effort. You could see things starting to click now. There's always kind of that freshman wall where there's a ton of information being thrown at them, just spit at them. And I think there was moments where you kind of see where it's just a whole lot of information. But as that starts to slow down, as he starts to grasp it, I think Kenrick Lanier is going to be a special player for the Gophers in future years. So I think he could see himself getting worked in 2024. We've already talked about Hoskins will definitely be a guy that will be more and more involved as the future years go on. The next other guys to kind of keep in mind, I think, is Dino Kaliakmanis. I think we saw Clay Geary earn more and more reps because of his work ethic and because of his attention to detail and his consistency. And I wouldn't be surprised if Dino Kaliakmanis could work his way into a similar type role and similar snaps. Like I said, we've mentioned Hoskins. I think 2024 is the year where he really takes off for this Gophers team and this roster and his opportunities. Plus, at that point, I think the game could slow down for him. And once the game slows down for Hoskins with his speed element, that is a dangerous man, an absolute threat. So I think 2024 is the year where he really blasts off. So you're talking about Hoskins, you're talking about Kenrick Lanier, like I said, and then you've got young guys that we haven't even seen yet, like New K's, like TJ McWilliams from the 2023 class, both of those guys who will have time to learn, develop, maybe take a redshirt year in 2023, and then head into the spring of 2024, ready to scrap and claw and try to get some opportunities and work their name into the rotation. And then you've also got 3 current 2024 commits in the class at wide receiver as well, in Dallas Sims, Jalen Smith, Corey Smith, and then the transfer portal is always there. Who knows what happens? Anything can happen in this transfer portal world. But I think that what you're seeing is the Gophers are starting to maybe make this depth and this pipeline of wide receivers. And it's similar to what we've seen with other positions like the offensive line, like the defensive backs, like the running backs, where you've got so much talent in there that you're starting to develop them as young guys, because Coach Flex says this is a a development university, they're always going to, it's a life program is what he says. They're always going to bring those young high school guys in, and they want to build them and they want to help develop them and prepare them for life. It's still a life program. So I think you got the talent coming in. They take maybe a year to redshirt, maybe some of those guys it takes 2 years, and then they step into bigger opportunities like we saw from Brockington this past season, where they are starting to build more and more into that starter mentality and work their way up from there. I think with Ethan Kaliakmanis and strong play from him, I wouldn't be surprised to see Minnesota growing in that space for recruiting in future years. We've seen that again from the DBs, from the O-line, from the running backs. And then the next couple of years, hopefully we can intrigue more wide receivers and quarterbacks in that top tier talent, high level of skill to give the Gophers a consideration and a look moving forward. That's what I've got for you today at Locked On Golden Gophers. That is our wide receiver talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss any future episodes. Tomorrow we're talking hoops, we're talking Grayson Grove, we're talking the scholarships that we have left to fill and if they will be filled, and much more on tomorrow's show. Be sure to subscribe. I'll see you then. Row the boat, Sky Ima, go Gophers, and don't forget to subscribe.